Welcome to True Crime Pulse. In this episode, we explore a tragic case where a stepson's secret affair spirals into obsession, leading to a grisly murder. Let us delve into the tragic details. Maria Sullivan, a vibrant and talented 38-year-old artist, was known throughout Summerville, South Carolina, for her creativity and warm-hearted nature. She resided in this small, picturesque town, famous for its charming downtown and the annual Flower Town Festival. As a freelance artist, Maria created exquisite paintings and sculptures, showcasing her works at local art fairs and galleries. Maria lived with her husband, David Sullivan, a retired naval officer, and her 18-year-old stepson, Tyler. Despite the 20-year age gap between Maria and David, their marriage, which had lasted 10 years, was marked by deep love and mutual admiration. They had met at a local art show where Maria's work was on display, and David was immediately captivated by her artistic passion and zest for life. While Maria was dedicated to fostering a harmonious household, the relationship with her stepson Tyler proved challenging. Having lost his biological mother several years earlier, Tyler struggled to bond with Maria, but she remained hopeful that their relationship would eventually improve. In addition to her artistic pursuits, Maria managed the household and cared for Tyler, trying her best to be a nurturing presence in his life. Maria's personal interests reflected her love of beauty and literature. In her spare time, she immersed herself in classic novels, often quoting authors such as Jane Austen and the Bronte sisters. Her love of nature was also evident in the colorful garden she cultivated, a beautiful representation of her artistic spirit. An active participant in her community, Maria volunteered at the Summerville Public Library and regularly took part in local events. In the days leading up to her death, she was working on a new art project, an inspiring series of sculptures that reflected the local wildlife in South Carolina's landscapes. She eagerly anticipated displaying these works at the upcoming Flower Town Festival. Moreover, she had planned a small family getaway, hopeful it would ease the tension between her and Tyler. To those who knew her, Maria was a charismatic and generous individual. Friends fondly recalled the warmth and hospitality she exuded at dinner parties, where she would prepare delightful meals and create a welcoming atmosphere. Despite the challenges she faced, Maria was a dreamer. She aspired to open her own art gallery one day, where she could share her work and inspire others. Tragically, her dreams were abruptly cut short by a senseless act of violence. On the morning of September 12, 2012, the town of Summerville stirred to life as usual, with a cool, clear day dawning. At approximately 8:30 a.m., Maria's neighbor, Lilibeth Carter, a 25-year-old aspiring author, approached the Sullivan household. Lilibeth and Maria often discussed true crime. Lilibeth was working on a novel inspired by real-life events, and Maria had always been a willing conversational partner. On that fateful morning, Lilibeth knocked on the door but received no answer, which was unusual given Maria's habit of early rising to work in her backyard art studio. Concerned, Lilibeth made her way to the studio, which stood apart from the house. As she approached, she noticed the door slightly ajar. Upon entering, Lilibeth was confronted with a horrific scene. Maria lay lifeless on the floor, covered in blood, the room around her in complete disarray. Broken sculptures and shattered glass bore witness to the violent struggle that had taken place. Overwhelmed by shock and horror, Lilibeth quickly dialed 911. The operator, attempting to calm her, instructed her to remain outside and await the arrival of law enforcement. Lilibeth, trembling and dazed, complied. She stood in the yard staring at the studio in disbelief, trying to process the horrific sight she had just witnessed. Police arrived within minutes, and upon inspecting the scene, they quickly identified a heavy sculpture near Maria's body as the murder weapon. The brutal nature of the attack was evident in the state of the room and the multiple blunt force injuries Maria had sustained. As the investigation unfolded, the initial witness, Lilibeth, was interviewed by authorities. The small, peaceful town of Summerville would soon be shaken to its core by the revelations that followed. She was still shaken but managed to provide a clear account of her mourning. She described her relationship with Maria and her reasons for visiting. Her detailed observations helped the investigators piece together the timeline of events leading up to the discovery of Maria's body. The discovery of Maria Sullivan's body marked the beginning of a complex and emotional investigation. Her friends and left in shock, struggling to understand how such a brutal crime could happen in their peaceful community. When the police arrived at the Sullivan house on the morning of September 12, 2012, they knew they had a serious crime on their hands. It was a sunny day in Somerville, and the peaceful neighborhood was quickly disturbed by the flashing lights and sirens of police cars. Detective Martin Coco, a seasoned investigator known for his thoroughness, led the team. With him was Officer Julia Montes, who was respected for her calm and methodical approach. They had both seen many crime scenes, but the brutality of this one stood out. The art studio where Maria's body was found was a small building in the backyard. As they entered, the detectives were met with a gruesome sight. Blood was splattered on the walls, and the floor was covered with broken sculptures and shattered glass. The room looked like a scene from a horror movie, a far cry from the creative space it usually was. So Maria's body lay on the floor, showing signs of a violent struggle. It was clear that she had been beaten to death with a heavy sculpture found nearby. The sculpture was stained with blood, indicating it was a murder weapon. Maria had multiple blunt force trauma injuries, suggesting a frenzied and brutal attack. The police immediately began their investigation. They cordoned off the area to preserve evidence. Detective Coco and Officer Montes carefully examined the crime scene, looking for any clues. They used advanced forensic techniques, including fingerprint dusting and blood pattern analysis, to piece together what had happened. The detectives worked quickly but meticulously. They collected samples of blood and hair for DNA analysis and took photographs of the scene from every angle. They also found a few items that seemed out of place, like a torn piece of cloth and a broken piece of jewelry, which they bagged as evidence. Outside, neighbors gathered, watching with a mix of fear and curiosity. The police asked anyone who had seen or heard anything unusual to come forward. They also conducted door-to-door interviews to gather more information about the hours leading up to the discovery of Maria's body. As the day went on, the police presence grew. Additional officers arrived to help with the investigation, and the media started to gather, drawn by the shocking nature of the crime. News reporters from local stations like WeZiv and the Post and Courier began reporting live from the scene, adding to the growing sense of urgency. By the end of the day, the police had gathered a substantial amount of evidence, but many questions remained. Who could have done this, and why? Detective Coco and Officer Montes knew they had a long road ahead, but they were determined to find justice for Maria. David Sullivan, Maria's husband, was the first suspect the police investigated. David, who was 58 years old, had a disciplined and stoic personality, shaped by his years of service in the Navy. He married Maria 10 years ago, providing her with stability and support. Despite his stern exterior, David was deeply in love with Maria and very protective of his family. On September 12, 2012, after the police discovered Maria's body, they brought David in for questioning. Detective Martin Coco and Officer Julia Montes conducted the interview. David appeared calm, but was shaken by the news of his wife's death. He told the detectives that he had been away on a business trip, staying at a Hampton Inn in Boston. He provided hotel receipts and a confirmation of his check-in and check-out times to back up his alibi. David's interview lasted several hours. The detectives asked him about his relationship with Maria and any possible enemies she might have had. David spoke about the tensions between Maria and his son Tyler. He mentioned that Tyler had been acting out since the death of his biological mother and struggled to accept Maria as a mother figure. David believed that despite these challenges, the family would eventually reconcile. The police also searched the Sullivan home for additional evidence. They went through David's belongings and searched his car, but found nothing suspicious. They interviewed David's colleagues and checked his phone records, all of which confirmed his alibi. Throughout the investigation, David maintained his composure. However, the strain was visible. He expressed his grief and disbelief that someone could harm Maria. He was cooperative with the police and provided them with any information they requested. Meanwhile, the local news outlets, such as WeZiv and the Post and Courier, reported on the investigation. Neighbors and friends of the Sullivans were shocked to hear that David was, and many described him as a kind and loving husband who would never harm his wife. Despite his strong alibi, the police continued to investigate David to ensure nothing was overlooked. They re-examined the crime scene and cross-checked all the details of his alibi. Detective Coco and Officer Montes wanted to be thorough, leaving no stone unturned. As days passed, it became clear that David was not involved in Maria's murder. the focus of the investigation shifted to other potential suspects. So while David was cleared, the pain of losing Maria and being under suspicion was a heavy burden he had to bear. On September 15, 2012, just 3 days after the discovery of Maria's body, Somerville was covered in a light drizzle. The gray skies matched the somber mood in the town. Around noon, while reviewing the evidence collected from the crime scene, Detective Martin Coco noticed something unusual. Hidden among Maria's art supplies in her studio were dozens of letters. These were not just any letters, but sexually explicit love letters exchanged between Maria and someone else. Detective Coco and Officer Julia Montes carefully read through the letters. The content revealed a secret affair between Maria and an unidentified individual. The letters spoke graphically of secret sex acts and deep, conflicting emotions. This discovery was a significant breakthrough in the case and suggested a possible motive for the murder. Detective Coco called for a meeting with the entire investigative team. They discussed the contents of the letters and the implications. The team knew they had to identify the other person involved in the affair to understand the full context and potential motives. Officer Montes led the effort to gather more information. She visited Maria's close friends and neighbors, asking if anyone knew about the affair. Many were shocked and had no idea Maria was involved with someone other than her husband, David. The news quickly spread through the small, very conservative Southern community, creating a buzz of gossip and speculation. Meanwhile, forensic experts analyzed the letters for fingerprints and DNA evidence. They also checked Maria's phone records and email history to find clues about her secret lover. The investigation was thorough, and every detail was scrutinized. On the same rainy afternoon, while examining Maria's phone, the detectives found a series of explicit text messages and call logs that led them to suspect Tyler, Maria's 18-year-old stepson. The messages hinted at a strained and complicated sexual relationship between Maria and Tyler. Some of the texts were heated, while others were more explicit and graphically described their sexual relationship. Detective Coco and Officer Montes were shocked by this new revelation. Tyler had always been seen as a troubled teenager, but the extent of his relationship with Maria was unexpected. The detectives knew they had to approach this delicately to get to the truth. The discovery of the love letters and text messages shifted the focus of the investigation. The police now had a clearer direction, and the pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together. They prepared to interrogate Tyler again, this time with new compelling evidence that could unlock the secrets behind Maria's tragic death. Tyler Sullivan, Maria's 18-year-old stepson, became the focus of the investigation after the discovery of the love letters and text messages. Tyler was a troubled teenager, still struggling with the death of his biological mother and the arrival of Maria into his life. He often acted out, showing signs of resentment towards Maria for taking his mother's place. Despite this, he was intelligent and ambitious, with a passion for music. He spent hours playing his guitar, dreaming of becoming a famous musician. On September 16, 2012, Tyler was brought in for questioning. Detective Martin Coco and Officer Julia Montes conducted the interview. Tyler appeared nervous but tried to remain calm. The detectives began by asking him about his relationship with Maria. Tyler admitted that their relationship was strained, but denied any involvement in her murder. When the detectives presented the love letters, Tyler's demeanor changed. He became visibly upset and defensive. He confessed to the affair, explaining that they started having sex about a year ago. Tyler said he became obsessed with Maria, believing that they could be together if his father David were out of the picture. However, Maria tried to end the affair and focus on her marriage, which frustrated Tyler. The detectives pressed Tyler for more details. They asked him about the night of Maria's murder. Tyler claimed he was at a friend's house, watching movies. The police checked his alibi, but it was weak and lacked concrete evidence. His friend Jake said Tyler was with him, but couldn't remember specific details or times. Tyler's reaction to the interrogation was a mix of anger and fear. He was defensive and argumentative, denying any involvement in the murder while expressing his frustration with Maria ending the affair. The detectives noted his conflicting emotions, which seemed to oscillate between sadness and anger. While Tyler was a prime suspect, the police needed more evidence to link him directly to the crime. They continued to analyze the physical evidence from the crime scene and cross-referenced it with Tyler's statements. The detectives also reviewed security camera footage from the neighborhood, hoping to find any inconsistencies in Tyler's alibi. The investigation into Tyler was intense and thorough. Detective Thompson and Officer Montes were determined to uncover the truth. They knew Tyler had a motive, but they needed solid evidence to prove his involvement. The love letters and text messages were crucial, but they had to build a strong case. The investigation was far from over, and the detectives continued to piece together the puzzle. Tyler remained a key figure in the case, and the police were determined to find justice for Maria. Lilibeth Carter, the Sullivans' 25-year-old neighbor, became another person of interest in the investigation. Lilibeth lived next door and frequently visited the Sullivan house. She had a keen interest in true crime stories and was working on a novel based on real-life events. Lilibeth was known for her observant nature and was often seen taking notes and photos around the neighborhood. On September 17, 2012, the police brought Lilibeth in for questioning. Detective Martin Coco and Officer Julia Montes conducted the interview. Lilibeth appeared calm and cooperative. She explained that she had a passion for writing and was fascinated by true crime. She often visited Maria to discuss her novel and get feedback on her writing. The detectives asked Lilibeth about the morning she discovered Maria's body. Lilibeth recounted the events in detail, describing how she found the studio door slightly open and discovered Maria lying on the floor. She spoke about her shock and horror and how she immediately called 911. The detectives noted that Lilibeth's account was consistent with the initial report. As the questioning continued, the detectives probed deeper into Lilibeth's relationship with the Sullivans. Lilibeth admitted that she often observed the family dynamics, noting the tension between Maria and Tyler. She also mentioned that she had seen Tyler acting suspiciously on several occasions, but didn't think much of it at the time. The detectives interrogated Lilibeth about her fascination with true crime, questioning whether it might have influenced her actions in the case of Maria Rodart Sullivan's murder. Lilibeth explained that her interest was purely academic and creative, claiming that she was a writer working on a novel and used her keen observations to construct realistic characters and scenarios. She vehemently denied any involvement in the crime, insisting that she was merely a concerned neighbor trying to make sense of the tragedy. Despite her calm and cooperative demeanor, the detectives couldn't shake the feeling that there might be something she was withholding. Unsettled by Lilibeth's composed attitude, the detectives obtained a warrant to search her home, and their search revealed notebooks filled with meticulous observations about her neighbors, especially the Sullivans. While these notes were detailed and sometimes intrusive, they found nothing that directly linked Lilibeth to the murder. However, she remained a person of interest. The investigators continued to monitor her closely, suspecting that there might be more to her seemingly benign curiosity. Meanwhile, they reviewed hours of neighborhood security footage, hoping to find anything that would confirm or absolve her involvement. The investigation into Lilibeth added a layer of complexity to the case, blurring the line between her genuine interest in crime and the possibility of her being connected to Maria's death. But as days turned into weeks, the detectives realized that they were barking up the wrong tree. On September 20th, 2012, the investigation took an unexpected turn. Detective Martin Coco and Officer Julia Montes had gathered enough evidence to formally accuse another suspect, Tyler Sullivan, Maria's 18-year-old stepson. From the beginning, Tyler's erratic behavior and emotional instability aroused suspicion, but without concrete proof, the detectives couldn't act on a hunch. That changed when they discovered Tyler's fingerprints on the murder weapon, a heavy sculpture Maria had kept in her art studio. Tyler's conflicting emotions about Maria, caught between resentment for her role in replacing his late mother and a confusing, toxic attraction, created a dangerous mix of hatred and desire. It was this storm of emotions that drove Tyler over the edge. His grades had been slipping, and Maria had recently confronted him about his academic failures, threatening to tell his father. But the real breaking point came when Maria decided to end the secret, illicit affair she had been having with him. Tyler had developed a deep, obsessive fixation on Maria, and her rejection sent him spiraling into rage. In a fit of fury, he lashed out, grabbing the sculpture and striking her multiple times, resulting in her death. With the evidence firmly pointing to Tyler, the police moved in to arrest him. They arrived at the Sullivan home that evening, finding Tyler in his room listening to music on his iPad, oblivious to the storm about to descend on him. He seemed stunned when the officers entered his room, but offered no resistance as he was handcuffed and taken away. David Sullivan, his father, was crushed by the news. He couldn't fathom that his son had committed such a violent act. The family, once held together by Maria's quiet strength, was now shattered beyond repair. The news of Tyler's arrest reverberated throughout the community. Friends and neighbors who had known Tyler as a quiet yet troubled young man were shocked to learn of his dark secrets. The press quickly latched onto the case, amplifying the town's horror and disbelief. During a press conference, the police detailed their investigation, explaining how Tyler's obsession with Maria escalated into violence. The love letters and text messages between the two, as well as Tyler's fingerprints on the murder weapon, painted a disturbing picture of a young man who had lost control. In the courtroom, Tyler's trial began on November 5, 2012, and became a media spectacle. Assistant District Attorney James Bliver, a seasoned prosecutor known for his no-nonsense approach, laid out the case methodically. He emphasized Tyler's dangerous infatuation with Maria and how her rejection had pushed him to murder. The prosecution's evidence, which included the explicit letters and forensic proof, left little room for doubt. On the other side, Tyler's defense was led by public defender Sarah Jane Lemon. A compassionate attorney with over 2 decades of experience, she painted a different picture of Tyler, a confused and emotionally scarred teenager who had been struggling to cope with the death of his biological mother. Lemon argued that Tyler's actions, while tragic, were not premeditated but the result of his emotional turmoil. She pleaded with the jury to see him as a broken child rather than a cold-blooded killer. After several intense weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for 2 days. On December 3, 2012, they returned their verdict. Tyler Sullivan was found guilty of second-degree murder. The courtroom was silent as the judge read the verdict aloud. Tyler stood emotionless, resigned to his fate. His father, David, sat in the front row, his face a mask of grief and disbelief, still grappling with the enormity of what had happened. The sentencing took place a week later, on December 10th. Tyler was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge acknowledged Tyler's mental health struggles, but stressed the brutality of the crime, stating that justice for Maria demanded a harsh sentence. As Tyler was led away, the courtroom felt a mixture of closure and sorrow. Maria's family, while relieved that justice had been served, still struggled with the loss of a mother, wife, and friend. Life in Summerville, South Carolina slowly resumed, but the scars from the tragedy remained. David Sullivan eventually left the town, unable to cope with the constant reminders of his shattered life. Tyler, now in prison, began receiving psychological counseling. He enrolled in education programs, including music theory classes, still clinging to the hope that he might someday pursue his dream of becoming a musician. Meanwhile, Lilibeth Carter, the neighbor who had first drawn attention due to her fascination with true crime, turned her traumatic experience into inspiration for her novel. Though the case brought her some unwanted attention, she found solace in writing, using the tragic events as a creative outlet. As the years passed, the community remained committed to supporting mental health awareness and honoring Maria's legacy. Her death was a painful reminder of how hidden emotional struggles could lead to tragic consequences. The town of Summerville would never forget Maria Rodart Sullivan or the dark path Tyler Sullivan had taken.